At our housewarming, my husband mistress arrived, dangling his key with a smirk. "Still the same locks, darling." Her whisper curled around him as she kissed his jaw. The room froze. I just smiled, poured her whiskey and slid an envelope across the table. "Take it all," I murmured. "But fair warning, some doors lock forever. Your wife has such lovely taste in home decor." Leah's voice carried from our living room where she stood admiring the family photos on our mantel. I'd just walked in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of appetizers for our housewarming guests, when I heard her comment to Jackson. But it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it, with that knowing smirk, like she was discussing someone else's life. Someone whose husband she'd been sleeping with for months. I froze in the doorway, watching her trace her finger along the edge of our wedding portrait. The same portrait where Jackson and I looked so happy, so completely in love. Now she stood there, bold as brass, commenting on my taste while planning to steal my husband. The tray trembled slightly in my hands, but I managed to keep my composure. Jackson laughed. That easy, comfortable laugh he used to save just for me. "Charlotte has always had an eye for making things beautiful," he said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought he was being sweet. But I did know better. I'd heard him whispering those same sweet words to her just 3 days ago. Before we continue with Charlotte's journey of reclaiming her power, if you believe that betrayed wives deserve justice and respect, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women facing similar battles. Now let's see how this unfolds. It had been Tuesday afternoon when I'd come home early from my book club meeting. Margaret had cancelled at the last minute, something about her granddaughter's school play. I decided to surprise Jackson with his favorite lasagna, maybe open a bottle of wine and spend a quiet evening together. We hadn't done that in months, and I thought it might help bridge whatever gap had grown between us. The house had been too quiet when I walked in. Jackson's car was in the driveway, but he wasn't in his usual spots. Not in his office reviewing client files, not in the garage tinkering with his motorcycle. I'd climbed the stairs, calling his name softly, thinking maybe he was taking a nap. That's when I'd heard his voice coming from our bedroom, low and intimate. "You know I can't just leave her, Leah. The kids, the house, it's complicated." My hand had gripped the banister so tightly I thought the wood might crack. "Leah." The same Leah who taught yoga at the community center where Jackson had been working out every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months. The same Leah who'd complimented my dress at the church fundraiser last spring. All smiles and warmth. "When has love ever been simple, darling?" Her voice had been soft, seductive. "Besides, you said yourself she doesn't really see you anymore. When's the last time she looked at you the way I do?" I'd pressed myself against the hallway wall, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. 23 years of marriage, and this was how I found out my husband had checked out. Through a doorway, listening to him discuss our private life with his mistress? "Charlotte's a good woman," Jackson had said, but his tone was distant, like he was talking about a neighbor he was fond of. "She takes care of everything, the kids, the house, even my mother when she was sick. But we've become more like roommates than lovers." The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been working so hard to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, keeping everything running smoothly so Jackson could focus on building his law practice. I'd sacrificed my own dreams, put my art degree on hold indefinitely, all to support his ambitions. And somehow my dedication had become boring to him. Now, watching Leah move through my living room like she belonged there, I remembered every word of that conversation. The way Jackson had described missing excitement, craving someone who made him feel young again. The promises he'd made about finding a way to be with her without destroying his reputation or losing access to his children. "This is quite the gathering," Leah continued, gesturing around the room filled with our friends and neighbors. "You must be so proud of what you've built together." The emphasis on "together" made my stomach clench. She was mocking me right there in front of everyone, and only I understood the game she was playing. Jackson beamed at her attention, introducing her to the Hendersons from down the street as his friend from the gym. Friend. The word tasted bitter in my mind. I moved through the room mechanically, playing the perfect hostess. I offered drinks, made small talk about the house renovations, complimented Mrs. Chin on her beautiful scarf. All while watching Leah work her way closer to my husband, her hand lingering on his arm when she laughed, her eyes finding his across the room with intimate familiarity. The worst part wasn't even her boldness, It was Jackson's obvious pleasure in it. He was practically glowing with satisfaction, like a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. Every smile she gave him, every casual touch, fed something in him that I apparently no longer could. "Charlotte dear, this spinach dip is absolutely divine." Mrs. Patterson's voice snapped me back to the present. "You simply must give me the recipe." "Of course," I managed, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "It's my grandmother's. She always said the secret was fresh nutmeg." But my attention drifted back to Jackson and Leah. They'd moved toward the windows overlooking our backyard, where Jackson was probably telling her about his plans for the garden. The same plans he'd discussed with me just last week, asking my opinion on where to plant the rose bushes. Now he was sharing those dreams with her as if she'd be the one helping him tend them. I watched him gesture toward the corner where we'd planned to put a swing set for when our daughter Emma brought her future children to visit. Jackson's eyes sparkled as he talked, more animated than I'd seen him in months. Leah nodded eagerly, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. That's when I noticed it, the key. She was holding my husband's house key, the spare from his keychain, twirling it between her fingers like a trophy. The key to the home I'd spent months renovating, the sanctuary I'd created for our family. She had access to everything that was mine. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. Not grief. I'd already mourned this marriage during those sleepless nights when Jackson came home smelling like her perfume. Not anger either. This was something much more dangerous. This was clarity. I excused myself from the conversation and walked calmly to the kitchen, setting down the empty appetizer tray. My hands were steady now. My mind was crystal clear for the first time in months. Jackson thought he'd found his escape, his second chance at happiness. Leah thought she'd won the prize. Both of them had underestimated the woman they were betraying. I pulled my phone from my purse and opened my contact list. James Morrison, the divorce attorney who'd handled my sister's case last year. I'd programmed his number months ago, during one of those dark 3 a.m. moments when I'd suspected but hadn't yet confirmed Jackson's infidelity. My finger hovered over his name for just a moment before I pressed call. "James? It's Charlotte Manning. I think it's time we had that conversation." "Mrs. Manning, I'm glad you called." James Morrison's voice was steady and reassuring through the phone. "Can you meet me Monday morning? 9 o'clock. I'll be there." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse, my heart racing but my resolve stronger than ever. The next morning, Jackson left for his early client meeting, code for breakfast with Leah at that little bistro on Maple Street. I waited 30 minutes after his car disappeared down our driveway before I began my real work. His home office was my first stop. Jackson had always been meticulous about his legal files, but apparently less careful about hiding his personal secrets. I photographed credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in neighboring towns during weekends when he claimed to be playing golf with his partners. The paper trail painted a vivid picture of deception. His laptop revealed even more damaging evidence. Email threads between him and Leah stretched back 8 months, much longer than I'd initially suspected. The early messages were flirtatious, then progressed to explicit planning of their encounters. But what made my blood run cold were the messages where they discussed me. "She's completely clueless," Jackson had written in March. "Charlotte's so wrapped up in her perfect housewife routine, she doesn't notice anything anymore. Sometimes I wonder if she'd even care if she found out." Leah's response was equally cruel. "Poor thing living in her little fantasy world. You deserve so much better than someone who's given up on life." I screenshot every conversation, saved every photo they'd shared, documented every lie Jackson had told me while planning his escapes with her. My hands shook as I worked, not from fear, but from fury at how casually they'd dismissed me, reduced me to nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. Tuesday afternoon, I followed Jackson to what he told me was a deposition meeting. Instead, he met Leah at Riverside Park, the same place where he'd proposed to me 24 years ago. The irony was lost on him but not on me. I parked across the street with a telephoto lens I'd bought the day before, capturing photos of them holding hands on our bench, kissing under our tree. The photography session yielded more than just evidence. It gave me clarity about Jackson's character. He wasn't just cheating. He was methodically destroying everything sacred about our relationship. Every special place, Every meaningful tradition he was sharing with her and erasing my presence from his life. Wednesday brought an unexpected gift. While Jackson was supposedly in court, our neighbor Mrs. Henderson called me over for coffee. "Charlotte, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right between you and Jackson?" My pulse quickened. "Why do you ask?" "Well, I've seen that young woman leaving your house several times when you weren't home. She has her own key, drives a blue sedan. I just assumed she was family, but then I realized I'd never met her at any of your gatherings." Eleanor Henderson was 73, sharp as a tack, and had lived next door for 15 years. Her testimony would be invaluable. I thanked her for her concern and gently encouraged her to write down the dates and times she'd observed this family member visiting. That evening, I installed a discreet recording app on my phone and placed it strategically during Jackson's next call with Leah. Their conversation was a masterclass in arrogance and planning. Jackson discussed his exit strategy, how he planned to gradually distance himself from family obligations, reduce his financial contributions to household expenses, and eventually move in with Leah. "I've already started moving money into the separate account," he told her. "Charlotte never looks at the bank statements anyway. By the time she realizes what's happening, I'll have secured enough to start fresh with you." The financial betrayal cut deeper than the emotional one. While I'd been managing our household budget, carefully saving for our children's college funds and our retirement, Jackson had been systematically draining our joint assets to fund his new life. Bank records showed transfers to an account I'd never known existed, payments to an apartment complex across town where Leah lived. Thursday morning I met with James Morrison. His office overlooked the courthouse where Jackson spent his days advocating for his clients, never imagining that his own wife was building a case against him just blocks away. "This is extensive documentation," James said, reviewing the files I'd brought. "Phone records, financial statements, witness testimony, photographic evidence. Your husband has been remarkably careless. He never thought I'd fight back," I explained. "He sees me as the submissive wife who'll accept whatever scraps of attention he throws my way." James nodded grimly. "That overconfidence is going to cost him dearly. In cases like this, the spouse who documents everything usually wins everything." We spent 2 hours strategizing. James explained how Jackson's affair and financial deception would impact property division, alimony arrangements, and most importantly, child custody. The evidence I'd gathered wasn't just powerful, it was devastating. "There's one more thing," I told James as our meeting concluded. "I want him to know that I know, but not until I'm ready. When I confront him, I want it to be complete destruction, not just a warning shot." Friday evening, Jackson came home late again, his shirt wrinkled and his cologne mixed with Leah's perfume. He kissed my cheek absently and mumbled something about grabbing a quick shower before dinner. As he headed upstairs, his phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen. "Tonight was incredible, my love. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore." Oh. For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. Jackson's confidence in his perfect plan was about to become his complete undoing. The evidence was compiled, the legal strategy was set, and the custody petition was ready to file. He thought he was playing chess while I played checkers. What he didn't realize was that I'd already won the game, he just hadn't seen the final move yet. Soon, very soon, Jackson would discover that underestimating the woman who'd stood beside him for 23 years was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. The documentation phase was complete. Now it was time for the confrontation he'd never see coming. 2 weeks later, I decided it was time. Jackson had grown bolder, staying out later, barely bothering to create believable excuses. He'd even started taking phone calls from Leah in front of me, stepping just outside the kitchen with a casual work call explanation that fooled no one. Our son David was visiting from college for the weekend, and Emma had driven down from her apartment downtown. Family dinner had always been sacred in our house, but Jackson's phone buzzed incessantly throughout the meal. When he finally answered it with a whispered, "Not now, I'll call you back," our children exchanged worried glances. "Dad, is everything okay at the firm?" Emma asked, her voice gentle but probing. Jackson's smile was tight. "Just the usual client emergencies, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But David wasn't buying it. At 22, he'd inherited his father's sharp instincts and his mother's protective nature. "Mom, you've been really quiet lately. Are you feeling all right?" I met my son's concerned gaze and felt my resolve crystallize. These beautiful, intelligent young adults deserved to know the truth about their father before he destroyed their respect for marriage, for commitment, for the values I'd tried so hard to instill in them. Actually, there's something your father and I need to discuss with both of you, I said calmly, setting down my fork. Jackson's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Charlotte, maybe we should. No, Jackson. They're adults. They deserve honesty. I stood and walked to the kitchen, retrieving the manila envelope from where I'd hidden it behind the coffee canister. My hands were steady as I returned to the dining room. What's that, Mom? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I placed the envelope on the table between the Sunday roast and the bowl of mashed potatoes. Such an ordinary family dinner, about to become extraordinary in all the wrong ways. Your father has been having an affair for the past 8 months, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. With a woman named Leah Patterson. They've been meeting in hotels, restaurants, even in our home when I wasn't here. He's been moving our money into a secret account to finance his new life with her. The silence that followed was deafening. David's fork clattered against his plate. Emma's face crumpled, then hardened as she looked at her father. Dad. Her voice broke on the word. Jackson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This isn't. Charlotte, you don't understand the complexity of. The complexity of what? David's voice was ice cold. Of lying to your family? Of betraying Mom after 23 years. You kids don't understand adult relationships, Jackson stammered, grasping for control. Your mother and I have grown apart. Sometimes people find connections elsewhere when. Stop. Emma's command cut through his excuses. Just stop talking, Dad. You're making it worse. I opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table. Bank statements showing the secret transfers. Photos of Jackson and Leah at restaurants, in parks, entering her apartment building. Text message printouts where they mocked me, planned their future, discussed how to minimize Jackson's financial obligations to his family. Emma picked up one of the photos with shaking hands. This is Riverside Park. Where you proposed to Mom. Emma, sweetheart. Don't call me sweetheart. She slammed the photo down, tears streaming. How could you take her there? How could you ruin that place for Mom? David was reading the text messages, his jaw clenching tighter with each page. You called Mom clueless. You said she was living in a fantasy world. He looked up at Jackson with pure disgust. This woman, this Leah, she's been in our house. She has a key. Jackson finally found his voice, but it came out as defensive anger instead of remorse. You're both acting like children. Marriages end, people move on. Your mother is trying to poison you against me with this dramatic presentation. Dramatic presentation? I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. Jackson, this is evidence. For the divorce proceedings. And the custody petition. His face went white. Custody petition? I pulled out the final document, the one James Morrison had filed that morning. Full custody of both children even though they're adults now. Alimony based on your documented financial deception. And 50% of all marital assets, including the retirement account you thought I didn't know about. Emma was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. You were planning to leave us? All of us. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. It's exactly that simple. You chose someone else over your family. Over Mom, who supported your career for decades. Over us. Jackson's phone buzzed again. Leah's name flashed on the screen. Without thinking, he answered it. Not now, Leah, I'm dealing with. He caught himself, but it was too late. Oh my God, Emma breathed. She's calling you during family dinner. Even now, even after Mom just exposed everything, you're still prioritizing her. David snatched the phone from his father's hand. Hello, Leah. This is Jackson's son. Yeah, the one he was planning to abandon for you. I just wanted to let you know that my mother has filed for divorce and you're about to be a very expensive mistake. He ended the call and set the phone on the table with deliberate calm. Jackson lunged for the phone, his composure finally cracking completely. You had no right. I had every right. David's voice was deadly quiet. She destroyed my parents' marriage. She gets to know there are consequences. The room fell silent except for Emma's quiet crying. She was holding another photo. One of Jackson and Leah kissing on our front porch, the same porch where she'd taken prom pictures just 4 years ago. "I can't even look at you right now," she whispered to her father. "I need to leave." As Emma gathered her purse and keys, Jackson finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he'd lost. "Please, Emma, David, don't let this destroy our relationship. I'm still your father." David paused at the doorway. "No, Dad. You are our father. Now you're just the man who broke our mother's heart and taught us that promises don't mean anything." The front door closed behind them with a finality that echoed through the house. Jackson and I sat in the ruins of our family dinner, 23 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and bitter truths scattered across the table like wreckage. "This isn't over, Charlotte," he said finally. I looked at the man I'd once loved more than life itself. "Yes, Jackson. It is." The morning after our family dinner confrontation, Jackson was gone. His clothes, his personal belongings, even his favorite coffee mug, all disappeared overnight like he'd never existed in our home. He left behind only a hastily scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown until we can work this out civilly." Civilly. The man who'd decimated our marriage with lies and financial theft wanted to handle things civilly. By noon, a courier delivered documents from Hartwell, Briggs and Associates, the most expensive divorce firm in the city. Jackson wasn't just hiring a lawyer, he was assembling an army. The papers demanded joint custody of all minor children and 50-50 asset division, conveniently ignoring the secret bank account and 8 months of documented adultery. I called James Morrison immediately. "They're trying to steamroll us before we can present our evidence properly." "Let them try," James replied calmly. "Expensive lawyers can't rewrite facts, Charlotte. We have documentation they can't dispute." The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Jackson launched what I can only describe as a charm offensive. He called Emma and David daily, painting himself as the victim of my vindictive overreaction. He sent flowers to my office with notes about working through this difficult time together. He even had the audacity to suggest marriage counseling through his attorney. But his biggest mistake was involving Leah in his legal strategy. 2 days before our first court appearance, I received a call from Emma. "Mom, you need to see something. Can you meet me at that coffee shop on 5th Street?" When I arrived, Emma was sitting in a corner booth with her laptop open, her face pale with anger. "Dad's been posting on social media," she said, turning the screen toward me. Jackson's Facebook page, which had been dormant for months, suddenly featured a series of carefully curated posts. Photos of him and Leah at upscale restaurants, hiking trails, cultural events, all time-stamped from the past week. But what made my blood boil were the captions. "Starting fresh with someone who truly appreciates life's adventures. Sometimes you have to choose happiness over settling. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings." Each post was a calculated slap in the face, designed to present their relationship as a healthy new start rather than the result of months of lying and betrayal. But Emma had noticed something I initially missed. "Look at the dates, Mom. He's been posting these every day since the family dinner. But look at this one." She pointed to a photo of Jackson and Leah at a wine tasting. "This was taken 6 months ago. I recognize the outfit she's wearing from the housewarming party." He's backdating posts to make it look like their relationship started after he left, not before. My daughter's sharp observation had just handed us another piece of evidence. Jackson's attempt to rewrite history on social media would backfire spectacularly in court. The first hearing was brutal. Jackson's lead attorney, Marcus Hartwell, was everything I'd expected. Silver-haired, commanding presence, expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He presented Jackson as a devoted father who'd made a difficult decision to leave an emotionally distant marriage. "My client recognizes that marriages sometimes end," Hartwell announced to the judge. "But his commitment to his children has never wavered. He's seeking joint custody and fair asset division, nothing more." When it was James's turn, he calmly presented our evidence chronologically. Bank statements showing the secret transfers starting 8 months before Jackson left. Text messages between Jackson and Leah discussing their future together, while Jackson was still living in our family home. Photos of them together at locations where Jackson had claimed to be attending work functions. But the most damaging evidence was Jackson's own social media manipulation. James displayed the screenshots Emma had captured, showing the original timestamps versus the posted dates. Your Honor, Mr. Manning isn't just rewriting his relationship timeline. He's actively deceiving the court about when this affair began, James stated. This demonstrates a pattern of calculated dishonesty that extends beyond marital infidelity into potential fraud. I watched Jackson's face crumble as his own attorney shot him a furious look. Hartwell clearly hadn't known about the social media posts, and his client's deception had just undermined their entire strategy. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen every possible divorce scenario in her 20-year career. She studied the evidence for what felt like an eternity before speaking. Mr. Manning, I'm troubled by these discrepancies in your timeline. More concerning is the apparent attempt to mislead this court about the nature and duration of your extramarital relationship. Jackson's second attorney, a younger woman named Rebecca Chase, tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, my client's social media posts were simply poor judgment during an emotional time. Counselor, Judge Hawkins interrupted, poor judgment is posting unflattering photos of your ex. This appears to be deliberate deception designed to influence these proceedings. The hearing was adjourned with a stern warning to Jackson about providing accurate information to the court. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Hartwell's angry whispers to his client about undisclosed information and compromised strategy. But Jackson wasn't finished fighting dirty. 2 weeks later, I received notice that he was challenging my fitness as a parent, claiming I'd emotionally manipulated our children against him and was using them as weapons in our divorce. The accusation was so outrageous that even James seemed shocked. He's desperate, he told me. This kind of counterattack usually backfires, but we need to be prepared for him to drag this out as long as possible. Jackson's desperation became evident during the second hearing when he took the stand himself. Under cross-examination, James methodically walked him through every lie, every secret meeting, every financial deception. Mr. Manning, you testified that you love your children above all else. Yet you moved nearly $40,000 from their college fund to finance your relationship with Ms. Patterson. How do you reconcile those two statements? Jackson's answer was a masterclass in deflection and self-pity. I was emotionally confused. My marriage had been dead for years. I made some financial decisions I regret, but that doesn't make me a bad father. Dead for years. James pressed. Yet you and Mrs. Manning attended couples counseling just 18 months ago, renewed your wedding vows on your 20th anniversary, and purchased a new home together last year. Which version is the truth, Mr. Manning? The courtroom was silent except for the court reporters clicking keys. Jackson had been caught in another lie and everyone could see it. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, took the stand as a character witness. Her testimony about Jackson's secret visits from Leah was damaging enough, but then she added a detail that stunned everyone. The young woman wasn't just visiting, Mrs. Henderson said in her clear, precise voice. She was moving things in. Clothes, furniture, personal items. It appeared she was preparing to live there permanently, even while Mrs. Manning was still in residence. Jackson had been planning to move Leah into our family home while I was still living there. The audacity of it left even his own attorneys speechless. When Judge Hawkins delivered her ruling 2 days later, Jackson sat beside his legal team looking like a broken man. Full custody to me. The house, the cars, and 70% of all marital assets. Jackson would pay substantial alimony and child support, even though our children were adults. Mr. Manning, the judge concluded, your pattern of deception, financial fraud, and disregard for your family's welfare has convinced this court that granting you shared custody would not serve anyone's best interests. As I walked out of that courthouse, James beside me carrying boxes of evidence that had secured my victory, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete peace. Jackson had gambled everything on his ability to charm and manipulate his way through the legal system. He'd lost it all. 3 months after the final court ruling, I was organizing Jackson's remaining belongings from the garage when Emma called with news that would have been shocking if I hadn't already witnessed Jackson's complete collapse. Mom, you'll never believe what David found out from his friend Marcus at the law school, Emma said, her voice carrying a mix of vindication and pity. Jackson got fired from his firm. I set down the box of his old law books and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Fired. Apparently, the senior partners held an emergency meeting last week. Marcus's dad works there. He said they couldn't risk having Jackson's name associated with the firm anymore. Too many high-profile clients were asking questions about his moral character after the divorce proceedings became public record. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jackson had always prided himself on his reputation, his standing in the legal community. Now that very community had rejected him as a liability. But the real surprise came 2 days later when Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door with her afternoon tea and a piece of gossip that even she seemed reluctant to share. "Charlotte dear, I hope you don't mind my mentioning this, but I thought you should know. That young woman Leah, she came by yesterday looking for Jackson. I invited Eleanor in, curious despite myself. What did she want?" Eleanor settled into my kitchen chair with a sigh. Well, she looked terrible, to be honest. Hair unwashed, dark circles under her eyes. She was practically begging to know where Jackson had moved. Said she'd been trying to reach him for weeks but his phone was disconnected. The mental image of Leah, once so confident and polished, reduced to showing up at my doorstep desperate for information about Jackson, was almost pitiable. Almost. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I had no idea where he'd gone. But Charlotte, the poor thing looked like she hadn't eaten in days. I offered her a glass of water and she just broke down crying right there on my porch." Eleanor's compassionate nature meant she felt sorry for everyone, even homewreckers. But her next words revealed just how far Leah had fallen. She kept saying something about losing her job, about how everyone at the yoga studio blamed her for what happened. Apparently, some of the other instructors' husbands attend Jackson's firm, or used to anyway, and word got around about the affair. The yoga studio where Leah taught had been her sanctuary, the place where she'd built her identity as a wellness guru and spiritual guide. Now even that had been stripped away by the consequences of her choices. A week later, I discovered just how complete Leah's social exile had become when I ran into Sarah Mitchell at the grocery store. Sarah had been friends with Leah since college and I'd seen them together countless times at community events. "Charlotte, I want you to know how sorry I am about everything," Sarah said, her voice heavy with guilt. "I had no idea Leah was involved with Jackson. If I'd known, I would have said something." "It's not your responsibility, Sarah. Leah made her choices." Sarah nodded, but I could see she was struggling with something. "The thing is, she called me last month asking if she could stay with my family for a while. Said she was having financial difficulties and needed a place to regroup. And I told her no." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I couldn't risk my marriage, my children's stability, for someone who had so little regard for other people's families. But I feel terrible about it." The conversation revealed the extent of Leah's isolation. When you're the other woman, you discover quickly that few people want to harbor someone who's proven she can't be trusted around marriages. 2 weeks later, I learned that Leah's isolation wasn't just social, it was geographical. David's girlfriend worked at the post office and mentioned that Leah had filed a forwarding address to Phoenix, Arizona. "She's gone." I asked David when he called to tell me. "Packed up and left town last weekend apparently. Her landlord said she broke her lease early, lost her deposit. Word is she couldn't find work anywhere in the city after the yoga studio let her go. Phoenix. A place where no one knew her story, where she could start over without the weight of being the woman who destroyed the Manning family. But I wondered if geographical distance could really outrun the person you'd become. The most unexpected update came from Jackson himself, though I only learned about it through Emma. He'd called our daughter in what she described as a pathetic state, rambling about how Leah had abandoned him when things got difficult. "He actually had the nerve to sound surprised, Mom," Emma told me during our weekly lunch. "Like he couldn't understand why someone who was willing to break up a marriage might not stick around when the situation became inconvenient for her." Jackson had apparently spent weeks trying to track down Leah, even hiring a private investigator to find her new address in Phoenix. When he finally reached her, she refused to see him or even speak with him on the phone. "He kept saying she owed him an explanation," Emma continued, shaking her head. "The man who spent 8 months lying to his family thinks someone owes him honesty. The irony is incredible." But perhaps the most telling detail came from David, who'd maintained sporadic contact with his father out of what he called morbid curiosity. "Dad's living in a studio apartment downtown," David reported. 1 room, hot plate, shared bathroom down the hall. He asked if he could borrow money for a deposit on a better place. What did you tell him? The same thing Leah apparently told him. No. David's voice was matter-of-fact. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. 6 months after my victory in court, I received one final piece of information about Leah's fate. A former colleague from the yoga studio called to tell me that Leah had tried to get her job back, claiming the whole affair had been a misunderstanding and that she'd been manipulated by an older man. Can you believe the nerve? The instructor asked. She actually tried to paint herself as the victim, like Jackson somehow forced her to wreck his marriage. But the yoga studio wasn't buying her revised narrative. They'd already replaced her with someone whose personal life didn't come with scandal and community backlash. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Leah's greatest punishment wasn't the loss of her job or even her exile from our city. It was the loss of her identity as someone special, someone worth destroying a family for. She'd convinced herself that Jackson's attention meant she was extraordinary, that their love was worth any cost. Now she was just another woman who'd made terrible choices, alone in a city where no one knew her name or cared about her story. Standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made that first call to James Morrison, I felt something I hadn't expected: complete indifference. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the peaceful absence of any feeling about Leah at all. She'd become what she'd always been, irrelevant to my life. I was free to move forward, to build something new on the foundation of my own strength rather than on the ruins of Jackson's betrayal. The woman who'd once threatened to steal my husband was now just a cautionary tale, a reminder that actions have consequences and that some doors once closed never open again. My children were proud of me. My friends respected my courage. My future was my own. The mistress had fallen, but I had risen. If this story of Charlotte's ultimate victory had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Charlotte handed Jackson that envelope at the family dinner, watching his face crumble as his children discovered the truth. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Ashley, 32 years old, and a corporate lawyer at one of Boston's top firms. My younger sister Kimberly and I were inseparable growing up, which made what happened at her wedding even more devastating. There I was, giving my maid of honor speech to 200 guests when Kimberly stormed onto the stage, slapped me hard across the face, and accused me of trying to ruin her special day. What nobody realized was that this betrayal went far deeper than a simple family disagreement. Before I share this painful story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit subscribe, and brace yourself for a wedding disaster that changed our family forever. Growing up, I always felt responsible for Kimberly. Being 3 years older, I was the one who walked her to school, helped with homework, and scared away the kids who tried to bully her. Our bedroom was split down the middle, my side neat and organized with books and debate trophies, her side colorful and chaotic with art supplies and fashion magazines. Despite our differences, we shared secrets, clothes, and dreams. Our parents ran a successful real estate business, which meant long hours and high expectations, particularly for me as the firstborn. Ashley, you need to set an example, became their mantra. When I brought home an A-, there were discussions about applying myself more, while Kimberly's BS were celebrated with ice cream. I never resented this difference, though. Kimberly had a creativity and social ease I admired but could never quite master. In high school, our paths diverged further. I was student council president, debate team captain, and focused on my pre-law track. Kimberly became the artistic spirit, involved in drama club and yearbook design. She had a new boyfriend every few months, while I dated the same serious-minded guy throughout junior and senior year. Despite our different circles, we remained close. Friday nights were sacred sister time, movies, popcorn, and talking until mom yelled at us to go to sleep. College tested our bond. I went to Northwestern while Kimberly stayed closer to home at the Rhode Island School of Design. During her sophomore year, Kimberly called me at 3 in the morning sobbing. Her boyfriend had cheated on her with her roommate, and she was failing 2 classes. I drove 6 hours through the night to be with her, helped her move to a new apartment, and stayed for a week organizing her assignments. My own midterm suffered, but seeing her back on her feet was worth it. "You're always saving me, Ash," she had said. "Someday I'll find a way to repay you." After graduation, our lives took predictable turns. I went to law school, then joined a prestigious firm with grueling 80-hour work weeks. Kimberly bounced between graphic design jobs, always finding her bosses too controlling or the work too corporate. She lived in a cute apartment with constantly changing roommates, while I purchased a sensible condo close to my office. The first signs of trouble emerged during family gatherings. When I received a promotion at 30, Kimberly's congratulations felt forced. "Must be nice having everything figured out," she'd commented, swirling her wine glass. "Some of us are still trying to find our way." I brushed it off, attributing her reaction to a recent job loss. Then came James. Kimberly met him at a gallery opening I had invited her to as my plus one. My firm represented the artist, and I couldn't attend alone. James was charming, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch. He claimed to be an investment consultant, though his explanation of his work seemed deliberately vague. When Kimberly wasn't looking, I caught him checking price tags on sculptures and calculating tips with suspicious precision. "He's perfect," Kimberly gushed on our ride home. "And he thinks I'm amazing. Did you see how he couldn't take his eyes off me?" "He seems nice," I replied cautiously. "Just take your time getting to know him." "Not everyone overthinks everything like you do, Ashley," she had said, her tone suddenly sharp. "Sometimes you just know." Over the next few months, James became a fixture at family dinners. He charmed our parents with stories about wealthy clients and exotic business trips. Mom was particularly impressed by his knowledge of wines and his promise to find them an exclusive vacation property through his connections. Dad, normally skeptical of Kimberly's boyfriends, was won over when James claimed to be a former college baseball player. Only I seemed to notice the inconsistencies. James once mentioned growing up in Seattle, then later referred to his childhood home in Chicago. He said he graduated from Wharton, but seemed unfamiliar with campus landmarks when I mentioned a case competition I'd attended there. Whenever I asked specific questions about his work, he would deflect with industry jargon or change the subject entirely. "Your sister's boyfriend gives me weird vibes," Rebecca, my childhood friend, commented after meeting him at my birthday dinner. "He keeps name-dropping, but something feels rehearsed." I nodded, relieved someone else noticed. "I've tried mentioning it to Kim, but she thinks I'm being overprotective." "Be careful," Rebecca warned. "People in love don't always want to hear the truth." Those words would prove prophetic in ways I couldn't imagine. The engagement announcement came just 11 months after they'd met. Kimberly called at midnight, her voice breathless with excitement. He proposed on the rooftop of the Mandarin Oriental, with champagne and roses everywhere. "I'm getting married, Ash." My stomach tightened, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "That's amazing, Kim. I'm so happy for you. Have you thought about dates yet?" "We're thinking October, just 6 months away." James says, "Why wait when you've found your soulmate?" "And Ashley," her voice softened, "will you be my maid of honor? I can't imagine anyone else standing beside me." Despite my reservations, tears filled my eyes. "Of course I will. I'd be honored." I threw myself into maid of honor duties with the same dedication I gave to legal cases. I created spreadsheets for vendor comparisons, organized bridal shower games, and researched bachelorette destinations that would accommodate everyone's budgets. My assistant at work started calling it the wedding case. The first real conflict erupted during dress shopping. Kimberly had chosen a high-end boutique where the starting price for gowns was $5,000. Mom and Dad agreed to contribute, but this seems excessive, I suggested gently. "There are beautiful dresses at half this price." Kimberly's face darkened. "Of course you'd say that. Not everyone wants to look like they're heading to a business meeting on their wedding day." "That's not what I meant. Just because you're still single and saving for retirement at 30 doesn't mean I have to live like that. James says I deserve the best." The comment stung, but I let it go. Similar incidents followed. Kimberly criticized my conservative dress choices. You could try showing some skin occasionally. My work schedule. No wonder you're single. You're married to your job. And even my hair. Have you considered highlights? You look washed out. Meanwhile, James became increasingly cold toward me when Kimberly wasn't watching. At the engagement party, I overheard him on the phone in the hallway, arguing about payment terms and mentioning high interest. When he spotted me, he abruptly ended the call and gave me a tight smile. Everything okay? I asked. Just business. Nothing a lawyer would find interesting. His tone was dismissive. By the way, Kimberly tells me you've been questioning some of our wedding choices. I'm just trying to help her stay within budget. I think you're jealous, he said bluntly. Kim's found happiness while you're still alone. Maybe focus on your own life instead of micromanaging hers. I walked away, shocked by his directness. Later that week, my suspicions compelled me to do something I'm not proud of. Using my firm's resources, I ran a background check on James. The initial results were concerning enough that I dug deeper. James Miller wasn't his original name. He had legally changed it 5 years ago from James Moretti. He had no degree from Wharton or any college. Most alarmingly, he had a string of maxed-out credit cards and a previous bankruptcy filing. His investment firm appeared to be little more than a website with stock photos and vague services. I deliberated for days about what to do with this information. The wedding was now just 3 weeks away. Invitations had been sent, deposits paid, Kimberly's expensive dress altered to perfection. Revealing the truth would devastate her, but letting her marry a liar seemed worse. The final straw came when our mother called, concerned about a large check she and Dad had written to help with wedding expenses, which James had insisted on handling personally. Has Kimberly mentioned their honeymoon plans? I asked carefully. James says it's a surprise for everyone, even Kim. Something about a private villa his client is lending them. My heart sank. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture was ugly. The week before the wedding, I discovered something that made my previous findings seem minor. Through a colleague who specialized in gambling law, I learned that James had accumulated over $50,000 in debt with several casinos in Atlantic City. He had been banned from 2 establishments for failure to pay. This wasn't just about lying on a resume or exaggerating his success. James had a serious gambling addiction and was clearly using my sister and family to fund it. My colleague also provided documents showing James had been fired from his last legitimate job at an insurance company for misappropriation of client funds. He was not only unemployed but potentially facing criminal charges if former clients pursued legal action. That night, I did something impulsive. I called James directly. "We need to talk about what I found," I said when he answered. "About your gambling debts and your real employment history." The charming facade dropped instantly. "You had no right to investigate me. I had every right to protect my sister." "Listen carefully," his voice turned threatening. "If you say anything to Kimberly or your parents, I'll make sure she never speaks to you again. I'll tell everyone you're mentally unstable from work stress and jealousy. Who do you think they'll believe? The guy who makes Kimberly happier than she's ever been, or her competitive sister who's always correcting her?" "They'll believe evidence," I countered, but my confidence wavered. "Stay out of it, Ashley. Some people might appreciate your controlling nature, but Kimberly and I aren't among them." He hung up, leaving me shaking. For 2 days, I wrestled with my conscience. Finally, 3 days before the wedding, I drove to Kimberly's apartment with a folder of documents. She greeted me with a hug, surrounded by wedding favors she was assembling. "Thank goodness you're here. I need help tying these ribbons. Kim, we need to talk about something important first." Her smile faded as I placed the folder on her coffee table. "What's this?" "Information about James that you need to see before Saturday." As she flipped through the pages, her expression shifted from confusion to anger. "You investigated my fiancé? What is wrong with you?" I had concerns, and they were justified. "He's not who he says he is." "Because he changed his name? Lots of people do that." "He's in massive gambling debt. He has no real job. The investment firm doesn't exist beyond a website. And I think he's using the wedding money from Mom and Dad for something other than vendors. Kimberly stood up, scattering papers. You've always done this. You can't stand that I'm happy and successful at something you're not. This has nothing to do with. You've always tried to overshadow me, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. When I got into art school, you had to point out the scholarship you got to Northwestern. When I started dating James, you immediately questioned his job. And now that I'm getting married before you, you can't stand it. The accusation felt like a physical blow. Kim, that's not true. I've only wanted what's best for you. What's best according to Ashley, right? Because you always know better than everyone else. She grabbed her phone. I'm calling Mom and Dad. They need to know how you're trying to ruin my wedding. Our parents arrived 30 minutes later to find us in the same standoff. Mom took one look at the scattered papers and sighed. Ashley, what have you done now? I tried explaining, showing them the evidence, but Dad cut me off. 3 days before the wedding? Even if there's some truth here, your timing is terrible. Mom put her arm around Kimberly, who was still crying. Weddings are stressful for everyone. Ashley, maybe you're transferring your work anxiety onto this situation. This isn't anxiety. It's facts. Are you all blind? Dad pulled me aside while Mom comforted Kimberly. Look, we appreciate that you care, but Kimberly is an adult. We have to let her make her own choices, even mistakes. Even when those mistakes could cost her everything? She loves him, Ashley. And right now, she needs her sister's support, not judgment. I looked over at Kimberly, who refused to meet my eyes. The distance between us felt insurmountable. Will you still be my maid of honor? She finally asked, her voice small. I need you there, even if you don't approve. Despite everything, she was still my little sister. Of course I will. As I left, Mom followed me to my car. Try to put this behind you for the wedding. For Kimberly's sake. And after the wedding? When he's spent all her money and broken her heart? Mom looked tired. Then we'll be there to help her pick up the pieces. That's what family does. I drove home feeling utterly alone, the folder of evidence beside me now seeming useless. The morning of the wedding dawned with picture-perfect October weather. I arrived at the hotel suite where the bridal party was getting ready, arms full of emergency supplies, fashion tape, extra hairpins, stain remover, and Advil. Kimberly was surrounded by bridesmaids, her makeup artist working on her face. When she saw me, she gave a tight smile. You're late. I checked my watch. I'm actually 10 minutes early. Everyone else has been here since 7. I bit back a retort. Today wasn't about being right. One of the bridesmaids, sensing tension, quickly handed me a mimosa and guided me to the hair stylist. Throughout the morning, Kimberly alternated between ignoring me completely and making passive-aggressive comments. When the photographer asked for sister photos, she complained that my Navy maid of honor dress was too corporate and pulling focus from her gown. When I helped adjust her veil, she flinched away as if my touch bothered her. Your nails look nice, I offered, trying to build a bridge. The French tip was a good choice. James suggested it. She replied curtly. He has excellent taste. The ceremony was set in a historic mansion with gardens overlooking the harbor. 200 guests filled white chairs on the manicured lawn. James stood at the altar looking impeccable in his tuxedo, though I noticed him wiping sweat from his brow repeatedly. As we lined up for the processional, I squeezed Kimberly's hand. You look beautiful. For a moment, her face softened. Thanks, Ash. Walking down the aisle ahead of her, I pushed my concerns aside. The setting was magical, rose petals scattered along the path, string quartet playing softly, golden autumn light casting everything in a warm glow. When our father escorted Kimberly toward James, genuine tears filled my eyes. Despite everything, I wanted this moment to be as perfect as she'd dreamed. The ceremony itself was brief, but touching. Kimberly's voice shook slightly as she recited her vows. James performed his part flawlessly, though I caught him checking his watch once when the officiant was speaking. As they exchanged rings, I silently prayed I was wrong about him. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant declared, and the crowd erupted in applause. The cocktail hour and dinner went smoothly. I made small talk with relatives, dodged questions about my own love life, and kept my professional smile firmly in place. The reception venue sparkled with thousands of fairy lights and centerpieces of white roses and hydrangeas. Kimberly had clearly spent every penny of the budget, and the result was admittedly stunning. I was seated at the head table, picking at my salmon while reviewing my maid of honor speech in my head. I'd rewritten it dozens of times in the past few days, removing any hint of my reservations. What remained was a collection of childhood memories and wishes for their happiness. Whatever came after today, at least I wouldn't have ruined her wedding. When the DJ called me up for the speech, I smoothed my dress and approached the microphone. 200 faces turned toward me expectantly. For those who don't know me, I'm Ashley, Kimberly's big sister, and today, her very proud maid of honor. My voice came out steadier than I felt. When we were little, Kimberly used to say she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. The irony is that as we've gotten older, I've often wished I could be more like her, fearless, creative, and able to light up any room she enters. I shared anecdotes about our childhood, Kimberly's disastrous attempt to cut my hair, our lemonade stand that turned into a mud pie business after a rainstorm, staying up all night talking about our futures. The crowd laughed at all the right moments, and I could see Kimberly's expression softening. Kimberly has always followed her heart, I continued, which led her to James. I turned toward the groom, and something in his expression made me pause. He was staring at me with naked hostility, his jaw clenched. That momentary hesitation was all it took. Before I could continue, Kimberly was suddenly beside me, grabbing the microphone. "That's enough," she hissed, then turned to the stunned crowd. "My sister thinks she knows everything about everyone." What she was about to say is that she doesn't approve of my choice to marry James. "Kim, that's not." The slap came out of nowhere, her palm connecting with my cheek with enough force to snap my head sideways. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. "You would ruin the happiest day of my life with your jealousy," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You couldn't stand that for once. Something was about me instead of perfect Ashley." I stood frozen, my cheek burning, as 200 guests witnessed my humiliation. James appeared beside Kimberly, putting his arm around her protectively while giving me a look of smug satisfaction. "I think you should leave," he said loudly enough for the front tables to hear. In that moment, I couldn't have formed words if I tried. I walked off the stage on shaky legs, past shocked relatives and friends, not looking at anyone. As I reached the exit, I heard the DJ awkwardly announce, "Let's get the party started," as music began playing. Outside in the parking lot, tears finally came. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, who had witnessed everything. "I'm so sorry. That was horrible. Call me when you're ready to talk." Not a single text from my parents. I drove home in my fancy dress, mascara streaking down my face, my sister's handprint still warm on my cheek. For 2 weeks, I moved through life like a ghost. I took sick leave from work for the first time in my career, unable to face client meetings with my usual confidence. I ignored calls from relatives wanting gossip about the wedding incident. My parents left one voicemail saying they were disappointed in how things turned out and that they'd talk when things settled down. They were accompanying Kimberly and James on their honeymoon as a wedding gift, a cruise I knew my father couldn't really afford. Rebecca brought me soup and sat with me through evenings when I alternated between tears and angry monologues. I was only trying to protect her. I kept saying, "Why couldn't anyone see that?" "People believe what they want to believe," Rebecca responded, "especially about love." On day 16 of my self-imposed isolation, I received a call from an unknown number. "Is this Ashley Wilson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Lauren Donahue. You don't know me, but I'm James Miller's ex-girlfriend. Or James Moretti, as I knew him." My heart raced. "How did you find me?" "I saw a wedding announcement in the Boston Globe. I recognized him immediately, despite the name change." I've been trying to work up the courage to call. She paused. We should meet in person. There's a lot you need to know. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe the next day. Lauren was petite with wary eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her wedding ring. Not from James, she explained quickly, but from her current husband. I dated James for 14 months, she began after ordering coffee. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. He proposed with a gorgeous ring. We planned an expensive wedding. 3 weeks before the date, I discovered he'd emptied our joint savings account of $22,000. My stomach dropped. What happened? When I confronted him, he claimed he'd made a bad investment but would fix everything. I believed him until his other lies started unraveling. The job at a hedge fund? Fabricated. The wealthy family? Non-existent. The Harvard degree? Never happened. She pulled out a folder eerily similar to the one I'd shown Kimberly. After I broke things off, I learned about 2 other women before me. Same pattern. Whirlwind romance, financial entanglement, disappearing money.
He's not just a con man, Ashley.
He enjoys the process, making women fall for him, turning them against their support systems, then taking everything. I tried to warn my sister, I said quietly. Nobody believed me. Lauren nodded grimly. That's his specialty. He isolates his targets. She slid several papers across the table. These are records of his previous identity, police reports I filed, and statements from other victims. I was too embarrassed to pursue charges at the time, which I regret. But it might help your sister when... She hesitated. When she realizes what's happening. If she realizes, I corrected. She's currently on a cruise with him and our parents. Lauren's expression turned alarmed. Your parents too? Ashley, you need to check their accounts immediately. James doesn't waste time. That afternoon, I called my mother under the pretense of a casual check-in. How's the cruise? Wonderful. James arranged everything beautifully. We have the suite next to theirs. That's great, I said carefully. Hey, did Dad mention if that check went through for the caterer? The final payment.
Oh, yes.
James handled all that. He even asked for an additional contribution toward their new condo down payment. Your father was happy to help, said it made up for how you behaved at the reception. I closed my eyes, fighting rising panic. How much, Mom? Ashley, that's between your father and them.
How?
Much. She sighed. 30,000. But it's a loan, not a gift. After hanging up, I immediately contacted my parents' financial advisor, with whom I'd been added as an emergency contact years ago. My worst fears were confirmed. My father had taken out a home equity loan to provide the money. That same day, my law firm colleague called with news. That tip about the casinos paid off. I found surveillance footage of your brother-in-law at 3 different Atlantic City locations last month. He wasn't alone either. He was with a man named Vincent Caruso, who has known connections to loan sharks. When I tried calling Kimberly's cell, it went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to sound casual, asking her to call me back about an important document that came to the house. No response came until 3 days later, not from Kimberly, but from my mother. Your sister's phone was stolen on the cruise, she explained, sounding strained. Some issue with international charges. We're flying home tomorrow instead of staying the extra week. James had an emergency come up. What kind of emergency? Business-related, she replied vaguely. Ashley, I need to go. We'll talk when we're home. I hung up and immediately called my bank. I need to open a new account and transfer funds from my main savings immediately. Something told me I'd need every dollar available to help clean up what was coming. Almost 3 months passed before I heard directly from Kimberly. I had sent texts, emails, even a handwritten letter apologizing for the wedding speech incident while carefully avoiding any mention of James. All went unanswered. Then, at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, my doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole to see Kimberly standing there, mascara streaking her face, hair disheveled. When I opened the door, she collapsed into my arms. You were right, she sobbed. About everything. I guided her to the couch, made tea, and waited while she cried herself into hiccuping breaths. Finally, she looked up with swollen eyes. He's gone. With everything. The story emerged in painful fragments. After returning from the abbreviated honeymoon, James had convinced Kimberly to combine all their finances. He'd suggested selling her car to avoid unnecessary payments and adding him to her credit cards for emergencies. The wedding gifts, all the checks, he said he was depositing them into our joint account for the down payment, she explained. But there was never any condo. He was just gathering it all. 3 days ago, she'd come home from a freelance job to find their apartment stripped of valuables, her laptop, jewelry, even the expensive wedding gifts. All bank accounts emptied. Credit cards maxed out with cash advances. He left a note, she said, pulling a crumpled paper from her purse. Thanks for the memories. Don't try to find me. Like it was a summer fling, not a marriage. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice steady. Have you filed a police report? She nodded. Yesterday. They said because we were married and he had authorized access to the accounts, it's complicated. Maybe fraud, but difficult to prove criminal intent. Fresh tears spilled. Mom and Dad's money is gone too. The loan they took out, $30,000 just gone. What about the honeymoon cruise? Who paid for that? There was no cruise package, she admitted. We stayed 3 nights in Miami, then James claimed the rest of the trip was canceled due to overbooking. He got a refund sent to his personal account. Mom and Dad never suspected anything because we all flew back together. I fought back the urge to say, I told you so. Instead, I asked, what do you need from me? Help, she whispered. I don't know what to do. I have nothing left. Not even my dignity. She touched my cheek gently. I slapped you in front of everyone.
How can you even look at me?
You're my sister, I said simply. We'll figure this out together. The next morning, I took a rare personal day, and we began the painful process of damage control. We filed additional police reports, contacted credit bureaus, and began the paperwork for an annulment based on fraud. I called in favors from colleagues who specialized in financial crimes and identity theft. Through our investigation, we discovered James had already moved on. A woman in Philadelphia had reported meeting a Julian Martinez, whose description and photos matched James perfectly. He had already taken her for $8,000 in investment opportunities. 2 weeks into our recovery efforts, we received an unexpected break. James had made a critical mistake. He'd used Kimberly's laptop to access accounts before taking it, and the browser had saved login information for an email address we didn't recognize. With help from my firm's cybersecurity expert, we were able to access the account remotely. What we found was damning: correspondence with multiple women dating back years, details of previous scams, and most crucially, communications with Vincent Caruso about gambling debts and payment plans that mentioned specific dates and locations. This is enough for a fraud case, my colleague confirmed. Maybe not guaranteed, but strong. Armed with this evidence, we arranged a meeting with our parents to explain everything. Dad looked 10 years older than when I'd last seen him, the strain of financial loss evident in the new lines on his face. We should have listened to you, he said, reviewing the documents. I was so focused on giving Kimberly her dream wedding that I ignored the warning signs. Mom reached for my hand. Can you ever forgive us for taking his side? Before I could answer, Kimberly's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She put it on speaker. Hello, Kimberly. James's smooth voice filled the room. I think we need to talk about your sister's little investigation. It needs to stop. We all froze, but Kimberly's eyes hardened. Where are you? That doesn't matter. What matters is that you call off the lawyers and police. It's embarrassing for everyone. You stole from me and my family, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. We were married. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine, he laughed. Besides, who's going to believe you? The unstable artist who slapped her sister at her own wedding? Everyone already thinks you're emotional and irrational. Your word against mine. I couldn't stay silent. It's not just her word, James. We have everything, the emails to Caruso, your previous identities, statements from other victims. There was a long pause.
Ashley.
Always the meddling big sister. You know, Kimberly would have never checked those accounts if you hadn't poisoned her mind against me. You did that yourself when you stole $58,000 from her family, I countered. This is what's going to happen, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. Kimberly will call off the investigation. In exchange, I won't tell everyone about her little breakdown last year, the antidepressants, the time off work. Imagine how our clients would react knowing their designer is mentally unstable.
Kimberly gasped.
I'd had no idea about any breakdown or medication. That's your leverage? Medical information she shared with you in confidence. I asked, disgusted. That's actually another crime to add to your list, medical blackmail. You always think you're the smartest person in the room, don't you, Ashley? His tone turned nasty. Your sister came to me willingly. She wanted what I offered. Excitement, passion, a life less boring than yours. Deep down, she knew something wasn't right, but she chose to ignore it because she was desperate to beat you at something. Kimberly's face crumpled, but I squeezed her hand. We're done being manipulated by you, I said firmly. The evidence has already been submitted to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Vincent Caruso might also be interested to know you're using his name to authorities. The mention of Caruso changed his tone immediately. You're bluffing. Check your hidden email. Someone's been accessing it for weeks. I nodded to Kimberly, who ended the call. We sat in stunned silence until Dad spoke up. What happens now? Now we push forward with every legal option, I said. It won't be quick or easy, but we have enough to build a case. Over the next several months, the truth about James spread through family and friends. Some expressed sympathy, while others couldn't resist saying they'd had suspicions all along. The annulment was granted on grounds of fraud. The FBI located James in Chicago, operating under yet another name, and arrested him for multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft. The financial recovery was slower. My parents had to refinance their home to manage the loss. Kimberly moved into my spare bedroom while rebuilding her savings and credit. I helped where I could, but made sure she took active steps herself, setting up payment plans, finding steady graphic design work, attending financial literacy classes. I feel so stupid, she admitted one night over takeout dinner. All the signs were there. He was a professional con artist, I reminded her. That's literally his job, making smart people do stupid things. She gave a small smile. When did you get so forgiving? Probably around the time I realized how much I missed my sister. 6 months after James's arrest, Kimberly and I established a new Friday night tradition, cooking dinner together at my place, sharing a bottle of wine, and slowly rebuilding our relationship. The process wasn't always smooth. We had decades of complicated feelings to work through, her jealousy, my controlling tendencies, our different approaches to life. One particularly emotional evening, after finishing a pasta dish we'd managed not to burn, Kimberly formally apologized for the slap. I've played that moment in my head 1,000 times, she said, staring into her wine glass. I was so angry, but not really at you. I think deep down I already knew something was wrong with James, and I couldn't bear to face it. I could have handled things differently too, I admitted. Investigating him behind your back, confronting you days before the wedding, my timing and approach were terrible. But you were right. Being right isn't always the most important thing, I said, surprising myself with the realization. I should have found a gentler way, brought my concerns up earlier, maybe focus more on supporting you than proving him wrong. This conversation opened the door to deeper healing. At my suggestion, we started attending family therapy sessions. Mom and Dad joined reluctantly at first, but soon embraced the opportunity to address patterns that had affected us for years. We did put different pressures on you too, Mom acknowledged in one session. Ashley, we pushed you to be perfect. Kimberly, we probably let you avoid too many consequences. And we should have taken Ashley's concerns more seriously, Dad added. We wanted so badly for the wedding to be perfect that we ignored clear warning signs. The therapist helped us develop better communication strategies and boundaries. Kimberly learned to assert herself without defensiveness. I practiced stepping back and listening without immediately offering solutions. Our parents worked on treating us as the adults we'd become. Slowly, the financial wounds healed too. My parents restructured their retirement plans. Kimberly's design business grew steadily as she channeled her experience into her work, attracting clients who appreciated her newfound confidence and professionalism. 1 year after the disastrous wedding, Kimberly started dating again, cautiously this time. Michael was a high school math teacher she met through a friend. With a simple lifestyle and transparent finances, he willingly shared early in their relationship. "He's nothing like James," she told me over coffee. "No flashy promises or whirlwind romance. Just genuine kindness and honesty." "He sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "I'm taking it slow. We've been dating 3 months, and he still hasn't seen my apartment." She smiled. "But he did pass the Ashley test when you interrogated him at dinner last week." "I did not interrogate him. I asked perfectly normal questions about his teaching philosophy. And his credit score and relationship with his mother," she teased. I laughed, grateful we could joke about it now. Old habits die hard. 2 months later, I was surprised when Kimberly invited me to lunch alone. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. "Michael asked me to move in with him," she blurted out. "I wanted to get your thoughts before I decide." The old Ashley would have immediately listed pros and cons, checked his lease agreement, and suggested a detailed timeline. Instead, I asked, "What does your heart tell you?" She looked surprised. "That I'm scared but excited. That he's nothing like James, but I'm still afraid of making another mistake." "Those are valid feelings. What would make you feel more secure about the decision?" She considered this. "Maybe a longer timeline? And keeping my own place for a few months as a safety net. That sounds reasonable. You don't have to rush." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for not telling me what to do. For trusting me to make my own decision." "That's what sisters are for," I replied. "Supporting each other's choices, even when they're different from what we might choose ourselves." 6 weeks later, Kimberly moved in with Michael, maintaining her own apartment lease for 3 additional months as planned. They established joint expenses while keeping separate accounts, her idea, which made me prouder than I could express. During this time, my own life expanded beyond work and family drama. I started dating a litigation attorney from a neighboring firm, took up hiking on weekends, and even considered a long overdue vacation. At dinner recently, Kimberly raised her glass in a toast. To sisters, who sometimes slap sense into each other, literally and figuratively. To growth, I countered, and to recognizing that love sometimes means stepping back instead of taking over. And to James, she added unexpectedly, who taught me what I don't want and inadvertently showed me what I truly need. We clinked glasses, our laughter healing the final cracks between us. The public humiliation of being slapped in front of 200 wedding guests has faded into a story we now tell with rueful smiles rather than tears. The lessons, however, remain vivid. Trust your instincts. True love doesn't need to rush, and sometimes the line between protection and interference is razor thin. I still believe truth is more important than keeping peace, but I've learned that how and when you deliver that truth matters deeply. Kimberly has grown to value security and transparency over grand gestures and excitement. And our family has learned that supporting someone doesn't always mean shielding them from potential mistakes. As for James, last we heard, he was serving time for fraud, his charming smile now reserved for prison visitors. Sometimes I wonder if he ever feels remorse for the emotional destruction he caused, or if we were simply characters in his ongoing performance. Has someone you love ever mistaken your protection for interference? Have you ever had to stand by while watching someone make a mistake you couldn't prevent? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to hear more family tales, and hit that notification bell. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives become our greatest teachers. Thank you for listening to my story, And remember, love doesn't require perfection, just presence and patience. I'm Jessica, 29, and I never thought I'd be responsible for my sister Amber's complete downfall. When she stole my $25,000 non-refundable deposit for my dream wedding venue and used it for her own wedding, I was devastated. The smug look on her face when she told me still haunts me. What Amber didn't realize was that by stealing my wedding venue, she'd handed me the perfect opportunity to unravel her carefully constructed life of lies. Before I dive into this family drama that changed everything, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever had a family member betray your trust, hit that like button. Family revenge stories like mine remind us that karma always collects its debts, so subscribe if you want to see more tales of justice served. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in a well-maintained colonial house in the suburbs of Boston, Amber and I were always portrayed as the perfect sisters. On the surface, our upper-middle-class family appeared picture-perfect. Dad Lawrence was a successful accountant, Mom Catherine taught at the local high school, and my sister and I were always well-dressed and polite in public. But behind closed doors, a much different dynamic was at play. From the moment I could form memories, Amber, who is 3 years older, established a pattern of taking my things. It started innocently enough. She'd borrow my toys without asking and return them broken, or she'd read my diary entries to her friends for entertainment. These might seem like typical sibling conflicts, but what made our situation unique was our parents' response. Instead of correcting Amber's behavior, they enabled it. "Jessica, you need to learn to share with your sister," my mom would say, completely ignoring the fact that sharing implied consent, which I never gave. "She's older and needs these things more than you do right now," my dad would add, reinforcing the hierarchy that would define our relationship well into adulthood. Our childhood home had 4 bedrooms, but when I turned 13, Amber suddenly decided she wanted my room because it had better light for her makeup vanity. Instead of telling her no, my parents moved me to the smaller bedroom near the noisy laundry room. When I complained, my mother simply said, "Your sister is going through a difficult phase, Jessica. Please try to be understanding." I remember crying myself to sleep that night, wondering what made Amber so special. This pattern continued throughout high school. When I made the cheerleading squad, Amber suddenly became interested in cheerleading too, despite having called it stupid the year before. Not only did she join, but my parents spent a fortune on private coaching to ensure she became captain. When I won a writing contest, Amber complained until my parents helped her submit a late entry that mysteriously received an honorable mention. Despite this underlying tension, we maintained the appearance of closeness. We posted sisterly photos on social media, went on shopping trips together, and to outsiders, we seemed inseparable. The truth was far more complicated. I both loved and resented my sister, a conflicting emotional state that I carried into adulthood. After college, I pursued law school while Amber bounced between marketing jobs, never quite finding her footing but always landing on her feet thanks to our parents' connections. I met Ryan during my second year at a Boston law firm where we both worked. He was intelligent, kind, and most importantly, he saw through Amber's charm offensive immediately. "Your sister seems to watch you very carefully," he observed after our third date when Amber had coincidentally shown up at the same restaurant. "It's almost like she's studying you." I had never thought about it that way, but Ryan was right. Amber didn't just want my things. She wanted my life, or at least the part she perceived as better than hers. When Ryan and I became serious, Amber's behavior shifted noticeably. Suddenly, she needed a relationship too. Marcus entered our lives at my parents' anniversary party 6 months after I started dating Ryan. Tall, impeccably dressed, and dripping with confidence, he introduced himself as a financial investor who had recently moved back to Boston after making his fortune in New York. My parents were immediately impressed by his stories of celebrity clients and luxury properties. Amber, seeing their approval, attached herself to him immediately. Their relationship progressed at warp speed. While Ryan and I built our connection thoughtfully over shared values and genuine compatibility, Amber and Marcus seemed to be in a race. When Ryan proposed to me after 2 years with a modest but meaningful diamond ring that we had chosen together, Amber announced her engagement to Marcus just 3 weeks later. Her ring was ostentatious, a diamond so large it looked almost comical on her slender hand. Marcus believes that the size of the diamond reflects the size of his love, she told me, her eyes challenging me to disagree. Behind her, my mother beamed with pride. Ryan and I began planning our wedding for the following September. We wanted something elegant but meaningful, and the search for the perfect venue became my passion project. After visiting 8 different locations, I found Hawthorne Estate, a historic mansion with breathtaking gardens and a grand ballroom that perfectly suited our vision. The estate only hosted 12 weddings per year, and they had exactly 1 Saturday available during our preferred month. "We need to act fast," the venue coordinator, Diane, told me. "This date will be gone by tomorrow if you don't secure it." The deposit was steep, $25,000 non-refundable, but after consulting with Ryan, we decided it was worth it. I withdrew the money from my personal savings, money I had been setting aside since my first job at 16, and handed over the check with trembling hands. Diane assured me I had made the right choice. "Your wedding will be absolutely magical here," she promised, handing me a folder with the contract and receipt. I can already envision it. When I shared the news with my family, everyone seemed genuinely happy for us. Even Amber offered congratulations and asked to see photos of the venue. My parents suggested a celebratory dinner, and for once, I felt like my milestone was being properly acknowledged. If only I had noticed the calculating look in Amber's eyes as she flipped through the venue brochure, perhaps I could have prevented what happened next. "September at Hawthorne will be perfect for you," she said, handing back the brochure. "I'm thinking about a winter wedding myself. Something different." I believed her. That was my first mistake. 2 months after securing Hawthorne Estate, I was at work reviewing contracts when my phone buzzed with a text from Diane, the venue coordinator. "Just confirming the date change paperwork came through okay? So excited for June 15th instead of September. The garden roses will be stunning then." I stared at my phone in confusion. I hadn't changed any dates. Ryan and I had specifically chosen September because it worked best with our work schedules and gave us adequate time to plan. I immediately called Diane. "There must be some mistake," I said when she answered. "I never requested a date change." There was an uncomfortable pause before Diane responded. "I'm looking at the paperwork right now, Jessica. It was submitted last week by Amber Wilson. She had the authorization code from the original contract and said she was handling the arrangements while you were busy with work. She mentioned you were siblings, so I assumed." My blood ran cold. What exactly did she change? "Well, everything," Diane admitted, sounding increasingly uncomfortable. "The date is now June 15th, and the reservation name has been changed to Amber Wilson and Marcus Blackwood. She provided an email authorizing the transfer with your signature. Did you not approve this?" I could barely breathe.
No.
I absolutely did not. After a difficult conversation where Diane explained that legally, since Amber had the authorization codes and what appeared to be my signed approval, the change was binding. The $25,000 non-refundable deposit had been transferred to Amber's event, and if I wanted my original September date, I would need to pay another full deposit, assuming the date was still available, which, as Diane regretfully informed me, it was not. Someone else had booked it within hours of Amber releasing it. I sat in my office, hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Ryan found me there an hour later, still staring blankly at my computer screen. "She stole our venue," I said when he asked what was wrong. "Amber somehow got the authorization codes and transferred everything to her name. She's getting married at Hawthorne in June." That evening, my parents had invited both couples for dinner. I hadn't told them what happened, wanting to confront Amber face to face. When Ryan and I arrived, Amber and Marcus were already there, champagne glasses in hand. "We have exciting news," my mother gushed as soon as we entered. "Amber and Marcus have moved up their wedding date. They found the most perfect venue." I looked directly at Amber. "Hawthorne Estate? For June 15th. A satisfied smile spread across her face.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing? I know you had looked at it too, but when they called saying they had a cancellation for June, I just couldn't pass it up. It's the perfect season for the gardens. They didn't call you, I said, my voice shaking. You stole my reservation. You transferred my deposit. The room fell silent. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably while my mother's smile faltered. Marcus looked genuinely confused, glancing between Amber and me. Don't be so dramatic, Jessica, Amber finally said with a dismissive wave. I did you a favor. September is hurricane season anyway, and it's not like you can't find another venue. You forged my signature, I said. You committed fraud. Ryan put his hand on my arm, silently supporting me while keeping me from saying something we might regret. My father finally spoke. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Amber, did you really take Jessica's reservation? Amber's expression hardened slightly before she manufactured tears. I didn't think she'd mind. Marcus's investors are only in town in June, and this venue means so much to me. Jessica has always been the sensible one. I thought she'd understand. To my horror, my mother moved to comfort Amber. Of course she understands. Don't you, Jessica? Your sister really loves this venue, and you can find another one. There are plenty of beautiful places around Boston. She stole $25,000 from me, I said, disbelieving what I was hearing. My life savings that I used as a deposit. Well, my father interjected, if the money is the issue, perhaps we can help with that. Though I'm sure Amber would have covered it eventually. Amber sniffled dramatically. Of course I would have. Once Marcus's next investment round closes. Which reminds me, Dad, did you get a chance to look at those papers I sent you? Marcus is offering family a special opportunity to invest. And just like that, the conversation shifted away from her theft to Marcus's supposed investment opportunity. Ryan and I sat through the most uncomfortable dinner of my life, watching as my sister not only got away with stealing my wedding venue but also managed to convince my parents to consider investing in her fiancé's business. The next day, Ryan suggested we speak with a lawyer about the venue situation. She forged your signature, Jess. That's criminal. We can fight this. But after consulting with a colleague who specialized in contract law, we discovered Amber had been clever. The authorization had come from my actual email account. She must have accessed it somehow, and the digital signature matched mine perfectly. Without proof of her breaking into my accounts, it would be difficult to prove fraud. The venue was acting in good faith, and their contract protected them from exactly this type of dispute. Despite the painful betrayal, Ryan and I agreed to attend Amber and Marcus's engagement party the following weekend. Partly to keep peace with my family, but also because I was still struggling to understand how my sister could do this to me. The party was held at their newly purchased luxury condo in downtown Boston, a stunning 2-story penthouse with panoramic views of the harbor. How can they afford this place? Ryan whispered as we took in the Italian marble countertops and custom furnishings. I thought you said Amber was between jobs again. She is, I confirmed. It must be all Marcus's money. As the evening progressed, I found myself alone on the balcony, needing a moment away from Amber's gloating and my parents' fawning. The sliding glass door was partially open, and I could hear Marcus and Amber speaking in hushed tones in his home office adjacent to the balcony. The Wilson family connection is perfect, Marcus was saying. Your father's reputation in the accounting world gives us immediate credibility. Once he invests, his colleagues will follow. He's reviewing the prospectus now, Amber replied. I told him we're offering 20% returns minimum. Marcus laughed softly. Nobody questions returns like that when they think they're getting insider access. Your parents will bring in at least 5 more investors, each with minimum $250,000 contributions. That should keep us going until after the wedding. And cover the venue deposit I had to transfer, Amber added. Jessica was so angry. Forget her, Marcus dismissed. By the time we're done, your family will see which sister made the better choice. Just make sure your father signs those papers this week. The Belgrade property deal won't wait. I retreated from the balcony, my mind racing. Something about their conversation set off alarm bells. 20% guaranteed returns? Rushing my father to invest? Properties in Belgrade? It all seemed too good to be true, and in my line of work, that usually meant it was. The conversation I overheard at Amber and Marcus's engagement party continued to trouble me. As an attorney with experience in corporate law, I knew that guaranteed returns of 20% were, at best, highly suspicious and, at worst, indicative of fraud. My concern wasn't just about Amber stealing my wedding venue anymore. I worried my parents could be getting pulled into something dangerous. When I returned to work on Monday, I decided to use my firm's legal database access to research Marcus Blackwood and his investment company, Blackwood Capital Partners. What I found, or rather, what I didn't find, was disturbing. Marcus claimed to have an MBA from Wharton and a track record of successful real estate investments in New York, but there was no Marcus Blackwood listed in any Wharton alumni database. His company was registered in Delaware only 14 months ago, with minimal public information available. The address listed for his New York office turned out to be a virtual office service that provided mail forwarding and occasional meeting rooms. This doesn't look right, I murmured to myself, printing out the documents I'd found. Ryan, who worked on the same floor, stopped by my office during lunch. "What are you working on?" he asked, noticing the stack of papers on my desk. I hesitated before answering. Despite everything, Amber was still my sister. "I'm looking into Marcus's business. Something feels off." Ryan sat down across from me. After what Amber did with the venue, I wouldn't be surprised if her fiancé is just as dishonest. I showed him what I'd found so far. Ryan, who had a background in financial law, immediately identified additional red flags. His company's SEC filings show assets under management of $50 million, but there's no verification. And look at these investment properties he claims to own. Ryan pointed to a list. 3 of these Belgrade developments don't even exist. I worked on a case involving Serbian real estate last year. Over the next 2 weeks, I dug deeper. Using my professional contacts, I discovered Marcus had previously operated under a different name, Mark Blackwell, in Florida, where he had been investigated for running an investment scheme but had left the state before charges were filed. His pattern was consistent: target wealthy individuals through personal connections, promise exclusive investment opportunities with unusually high returns, use new investor money to pay early investors, and maintain a lavish lifestyle to create the appearance of success. It was the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme. My stomach churned as I realized what this meant. Marcus wasn't just a fraudster. He was using Amber to access my parents' retirement savings and their professional network. And Amber, whether knowingly or not, was helping him. I faced an impossible choice: expose Marcus and potentially implicate my sister, or stay silent while my parents and their friends lost their life savings. Ryan urged me to report what I'd found. "This isn't just about you and Amber anymore," he said gently. "Think about all the other people who will be hurt if you do nothing." "But what if Amber is involved?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if she knows exactly what he's doing?" Ryan took my hand. "Then she's made her choice, Jess. Just like she made her choice about our wedding venue." I spent 3 days weighing my options, hardly sleeping as I considered the consequences of each path. During this time, Amber called to ask if I would be her maid of honor. "I know you were upset about the venue thing," she said casually, as if she'd borrowed a sweater, without asking, rather than stolen $25,000 and my dream wedding location. "But we're sisters. No one else could be my maid of honor but you." Her audacity reignited my anger. "After what you did, you expect me to stand beside you at MY venue?" "Oh, Jessica," she sighed, "always so dramatic. It's just a building. And technically, it's mine now." "Mom and Dad think you're being childish about this whole situation. Did you tell them you forged my signature? That you stole my deposit?" I prefer to think of it as reallocating resources to where they'll make the biggest impact. "Marcus says my wedding will be featured in Boston Magazine. Yours would have just been ordinary." After that conversation, I decided to make one last attempt to confirm my suspicions before taking action. I created a fake email account and contacted several real estate developers in Belgrade, inquiring about partnerships with Blackwood Capital Partners. The responses confirmed my worst fears. None had ever heard of the company or the developments Marcus claimed to be funding. That night, I submitted an anonymous tip to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, through their whistleblower program, providing the evidence I had gathered about Marcus's fraudulent scheme. I didn't mention Amber's potential involvement, telling myself she might truly be unaware of what her fiancé was doing. 3 days later, I received a call from an FBI agent named Natalie Cortez. "We received your tip about Marcus Blackwood," she said without preamble when I answered. "We've actually been investigating him for several months, but the information you provided gives us connections we were missing." My heart raced. Several months? "So you already knew he was running a Ponzi scheme?" "We suspected, but couldn't prove the connection between his current operation and his previous schemes in Florida and Arizona. Your documentation of the Belgrade properties and the investment solicitation materials you provided were extremely helpful." I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We continue building our case," Agent Cortez explained. "These investigations take time to ensure we have everything properly documented before making arrests. In the meantime, I need to ask you to maintain absolute confidentiality about this conversation." "Of course," I agreed. "But my parents are considering investing with him. Is there anything I can do to warn them without compromising your investigation?" "Unfortunately, no," she said firmly. "Any unusual behavior could tip off Blackwood that we're onto him. However, I can tell you we're moving as quickly as possible, and we believe we'll be ready to act within the next few weeks." After the call, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. The authorities were already investigating, which validated my concerns, but I couldn't warn my family without risking the entire case. All I could do was wait and try to act normal, including agreeing to be Amber's maid of honor. The following Sunday, my parents invited us all for brunch. Amber spent the entire meal discussing wedding details, showing photos of expensive flower arrangements and custom invitations. "By the way, Jessica," my mother said as she cleared the plates, "we were thinking you and Ryan might want to contribute to the wedding expenses, since you're saving money now that you need to find a smaller venue for your wedding." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" "Well, Amber and Marcus are going all out for their special day," my father chimed in. "The budget has gotten a bit stretched, and as maid of honor, it would be a nice gesture." I looked at Amber, who smiled innocently. "I thought the 20% returns on Dad's investment would more than cover your wedding costs," I said pointedly. A flicker of something alarm? Guilt crossed Amber's face before she composed herself. "Marcus's investments are separate from our wedding, obviously, though he has generously offered to help Mom and Dad boost their retirement fund." Later, as Ryan and I were leaving, he pulled me aside in the driveway. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, looking uncomfortable. "At your parents' anniversary party last month, when you were helping your mom in the kitchen, Amber cornered me in the hallway." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She'd had a few drinks and started saying things about how you and I weren't right for each other, that I deserved someone more exciting." He looked away, clearly embarrassed. "Then she tried to kiss me. I pushed her away immediately, but she laughed it off like it was a joke. I felt like I'd been punched." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't want to cause more problems between you two, and honestly, I thought it was just Amber being drunk and inappropriate. But after everything that's happened with the venue, I'm wondering if there's more to it." That night, I discovered through mutual friends that Amber had been telling people Ryan was planning to leave me, that our relationship was on the rocks. It was one thing to steal my wedding venue, but trying to undermine my relationship and spread lies about my fiancé crossed a line I hadn't imagined even Amber would cross. Any lingering guilt I felt about reporting Marcus disappeared. Whatever happened next, Amber and Marcus had brought it upon themselves. In the weeks following my conversation with FBI agent Cortez, I maintained the facade of a begrudgingly supportive sister. I attended Amber's cake tasting, nodded through her endless monologues about table settings, and even suffered through a bridesmaid dress fitting for a gown she deliberately selected to be unflattering on me. Lavender isn't really your color, she mused as I stood on the pedestal in the bridal salon, the poorly cut dress making me look sallow and boxy. But it works so beautifully with my theme. Behind the scenes, I continued gathering evidence. Using my legal expertise, I carefully documented every questionable aspect of Marcus's business that I could find without raising suspicions. I discovered he had opened and closed 7 different investment companies in the past decade, each following the same pattern of promised high returns followed by mysterious business failures. I compiled records showing how his current company, Blackwood Capital Partners, was structured identically to his previous fraudulent operations. One afternoon, Agent Cortez called with an update. "We've linked Blackwood to accounts in the Cayman Islands where he's been funneling investor funds," she informed me. "But we're still working on connecting all the dots for the strongest possible case." "My parents signed investment papers last week," I told her, my voice tight with worry. "They're planning to transfer a significant portion of their retirement savings to him after their CD matures next month." There was a pause on the line. "We're doing everything we can to move quickly, Ms. Wilson. The documentation you've provided has been invaluable. Is my sister implicated?" I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. Agent Cortez's voice became carefully neutral. "We investigate the evidence wherever it leads us. If your sister has knowledge of or participation in financial fraud, that will be determined as the case progresses." That wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for, but it was the honest answer I expected. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wedding invitation that had arrived that morning. Thick cream cardstock with gold foil lettering announced Amber and Marcus's wedding at Hawthorne Estate, my venue, purchased with my deposit, just 3 weeks away. Ryan found me there, the invitation crumpled in my hand. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to stop this whole thing before my parents lose their savings, but another part of me feels like Amber deserves whatever is coming to her." "What kind of person does that make me?" Ryan took my hand. "It makes you human. Amber betrayed you in one of the worst ways a sister could, and it's natural to want justice. But you're also trying to protect your parents and other innocent people from being defrauded. Your motives aren't purely revenge." His words comforted me, but I still felt the weight of what was to come. By reporting Marcus, I had set in motion events that would likely destroy my sister's wedding and possibly lead to her arrest if she was knowingly involved in his scheme. The thought made me physically ill, yet I couldn't see any other ethical choice. As if sensing my internal struggle, Ryan added, "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, Jess. That doesn't mean it's not right." That evening, my mother called to discuss Amber's bridal shower, which I was expected to host as maid of honor. The conversation quickly turned to complaints about my apparent lack of enthusiasm. "Your sister is making every effort to include you in her special day despite your attitude about the venue situation," she chided. "The least you could do is show some genuine happiness for her." I bit my tongue, knowing it was pointless to argue. But then my mother added something that caught me off guard. "Amber mentioned that things between you and Ryan seem strained lately. If you're having relationship problems, honey, it's better to address them now before your wedding." Though Amber thinks, and I have to say I agree, that perhaps Ryan isn't the right match for you. He's always been so predictable. The realization that Amber was actively trying to sabotage my relationship with Ryan to my own mother made something inside me snap. Not only had she stolen my venue and my deposit, but she was now attempting to poison my parents against the man I loved. "Ryan and I are perfectly happy," I said coldly. "Amber has no idea what she's talking about." "Well, she said she saw him having lunch with that pretty paralegal from your firm. Apparently, they looked quite cozy." Another lie. Ryan had been working through lunch all week on a major case. "Mom, please stop," I said firmly. "Amber is lying to you. Ryan would never cheat on me, and I'm tired of her spreading rumors about us." "Jessica." My mother sounded genuinely shocked. "Your sister would never intentionally hurt you. If she mentioned seeing Ryan with someone, I'm sure she was just concerned." After that conversation, any remaining guilt I felt about what might happen to Amber evaporated. She wasn't just a bystander in Marcus's schemes, she was actively manipulative and vindictive in her own right. The next day, I received another call from Agent Cortez. "We've accelerated our timeline," she informed me. "Based on new information, we believe Blackwood is preparing to transfer a large sum of money offshore following his wedding. We'll be moving to make arrests within the next 10 days. My heart pounded. The wedding is in 2 weeks. "I can't give you the exact date we'll be taking action," she said carefully, "but I would advise you to be prepared for developments that may coincide with wedding-related events." The implication was clear. The FBI might make arrests during or around the time of Amber and Marcus's wedding. The timing seemed almost poetic. The venue she had stolen from me could become the scene of her greatest humiliation. As the maid of honor, I was expected to help Amber prepare on her wedding day. Walking into that role knowing what might happen filled me with conflicting emotions. I wasn't a vengeful person by nature, but after everything Amber had done, the theft, the lies, the attempts to undermine my relationship, I couldn't bring myself to warn her. If you've ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted, especially family, you know how deeply it cuts. And when that betrayal is calculated and remorseless, sometimes the only closure comes from seeing justice served. I was approaching that moment now, and despite everything, a part of me still wondered if I was doing the right thing. But then I remembered all the times Amber had taken from me without consequence, and I knew this time would be different. The morning of Amber's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day that seemed to mock the storm I knew was brewing. I arrived at Hawthorne Estate at 8 a.m., carrying my lavender bridesmaid dress and a makeup bag. The historic mansion looked even more beautiful than when I had first toured it. Gardens in full bloom, the grand facade freshly painted, and staff bustling about setting up for what should have been my special day. Amber was already in the bridal suite, surrounded by the 3 other bridesmaids, all friends from her college days who clearly knew nothing about how she had acquired this venue. "Finally," she said when I entered, barely looking up from her phone. "I need you to check on the flower delivery. The roses should be blush pink, not regular pink. And tell Mom to stop bothering the caterers. No greeting, no thank you, just demands." Typical Amber. I dutifully went to check on the flowers, which were, of course, the exact shade Amber had specified. As I was confirming the delivery, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Operation proceeding as planned. Agents in position by 2 p.m. NC, Agent Cortez." The FBI would be here during the ceremony, which was scheduled for 3 o'clock. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to the bridal suite. The next few hours were a blur of hairstyling, makeup application, and managing Amber's increasingly demanding behavior. My mother fluttered around her favorite daughter, adjusting her veil and exclaiming over how beautiful she looked, while barely acknowledging my presence. "Jessica, you need more blush," my mother critiqued as I finished my makeup. "You look washed out in that dress." The dress Amber chose, I reminded her quietly. My mother frowned. "Don't start with that attitude today. This is your sister's special day, and I expect you to be supportive no matter what issues you've had in the past." I swallowed my retort and applied more blush. Amber caught my eye in the mirror and smirked, clearly enjoying the dynamic. As the hours ticked by and we approached the ceremony time, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. What exactly would happen when the FBI arrived? Would they wait until after the vows, or interrupt the ceremony itself? Would Amber be arrested alongside Marcus, or merely questioned? Despite everything, the thought of my sister in handcuffs made my stomach churn. At 2:30, we lined up for the processional. Through the windows, I could see guests being seated in the garden where the ceremony would take place. From my position, I also noticed several unobtrusive men and women in dark suits taking positions around the perimeter of the property. One nodded slightly in my direction, a federal agent, no doubt. Amber looked radiant in her designer gown, oblivious to what was about to unfold. For a brief moment, I considered pulling her aside, giving her some cryptic warning that might spare her the public humiliation. But then she turned to me with a final jab. "Try not to look so miserable in the photos, Jessica. I know you're jealous that I'm getting married here first, but You really should be grateful. I'm even letting you participate after how difficult you've been." Any impulse to warn her vanished. The processional music began, and one by one, the bridesmaids walked down the aisle. When my turn came, I stepped out into the sunlight, forcing a smile as I made my way past rows of guests. Many of whom, I realized with a pang, were probably investors in Marcus's scheme. I took my place at the altar and watched as Amber floated down the aisle on our father's arm, the picture of bridal perfection. Marcus waited at the end, looking handsome and confident in his tuxedo, not like a man about to be arrested for multiple counts of fraud. The ceremony began, with the officiant speaking about love, trust, and honesty, words that rang hollow given the circumstances. As Marcus and Amber exchanged their personalized vows, promising to stand by each other through anything life might bring, I noticed movement at the back of the seated guests. 3 men and 2 women in dark suits were approaching discreetly from different directions, converging on the altar area. Agent Cortez was among them, her face professionally neutral as she positioned herself to the side, waiting for precisely the right moment. The officiant had just said, "If anyone knows of any reason why these 2 should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace," when Agent Cortez stepped forward. "Marcus Blackwood," she announced clearly, holding up her badge, "I'm Special Agent Natalie Cortez with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The guests gasped collectively. Marcus froze, his confident demeanor cracking as he glanced frantically around, perhaps looking for an escape route. But the federal agents had positioned themselves strategically. There was nowhere to run. Amber's face drained of color. "What is this?" she demanded, looking from Marcus to the agents to me. "What's happening?" Agent Cortez continued professionally. "Please place your hands behind your back, Mr. Blackwood." As another agent approached with handcuffs, Marcus suddenly pointed at me. "She did this," he shouted. "Jessica Wilson. She's been trying to sabotage our wedding from the start." All eyes turned to me. I maintained a carefully neutral expression, neither confirming nor denying his accusation. Amber's shock was transforming into rage as the reality of the situation dawned on her. "Jessica," she hissed, "what have you done?" Before I could respond, Agent Cortez interjected. "This arrest is the result of a months-long federal investigation into Mr. Blackwood's fraudulent investment schemes. Now, sir, please cooperate or we will add resisting arrest to your charges." As Marcus was handcuffed and led away, chaos erupted among the guests. Some were rushing forward with questions, likely investors concerned about their money, while others were hurriedly leaving, perhaps not wanting to be associated with the scandal. My parents pushed through the crowd to reach Amber, who had crumpled onto the altar steps, her perfect white dress pooling around her. My mother gathered her into her arms while my father turned to me, his face a mixture of confusion and accusation. "Did you know about this?" he demanded. "I had suspicions about Marcus's business practices," I answered carefully. I reported those concerns to the proper authorities, as any responsible attorney would. "On your sister's wedding day?" my mother cried, looking up from Amber with tears streaming down her face. "How could you be so cruel?" "I didn't choose the timing," I said, which was technically true. "The FBI conducted their own investigation and made their own decisions about when to act." Amber's head snapped up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "You knew this would happen today. You stood there as my maid of honor, knowing they were coming to arrest Marcus." I met her gaze steadily. "Just like you stood there knowing you had stolen my venue and my deposit." "That was different," she shrieked. "That was just a stupid venue. And this is just a stupid wedding," I countered coldly. "At least, that's how you would see it if it had happened to me instead of you." My father stepped between us. "That's enough, Jessica. Can't you see your sister is devastated? Whatever Marcus did has nothing to do with her." I wasn't so sure about that, but I kept that thought to myself. Ryan appeared at my side, taking my hand supportively as Agent Cortez approached our family group. "Ms. Wilson," she addressed Amber, her tone professional but not unkind. "I need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of Mr. Blackwood's business activities." We can do this here or at our office, but it needs to happen now. Amber looked at her in disbelief. You want to question me? I'm the victim here. My wedding has been ruined. Agent Cortez's expression didn't change. Nam, we have evidence suggesting you were aware of and potentially involved in soliciting investments for Mr. Blackwood's fraudulent schemes. I'm giving you the courtesy of a private conversation before deciding if formal charges are warranted. The color drained from Amber's face again, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. My parents looked shell-shocked. Amber wouldn't be involved in anything illegal, my mother insisted. There must be some mistake. Agent Cortez simply repeated, We need to speak with your daughter now. As Amber was led away for questioning, my parents turned on me with fury and disappointment. How could you let this happen? My mother demanded. Your own sister. I didn't make Amber associate with a criminal, I said firmly. And I certainly didn't make her steal my wedding venue or try to sabotage my relationship with Ryan. Whatever is happening now is the consequence of her own choices. My father shook his head. You've always been jealous of your sister. I never thought you'd go this far to hurt her. Their words stung, but I wasn't surprised. In their eyes, Amber could do no wrong, and I would always be the villain in her story. As they walked away to find Amber, Ryan squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, he reassured me. Marcus was defrauding people, including your parents. This would have happened eventually, with or without your tip. I nodded, but the weight of the day's events was finally hitting me. I had wanted justice, but watching my sister's perfect day implode so spectacularly left me with complicated feelings. Not regret, exactly, but a certain heaviness I hadn't anticipated. As the guests dispersed and the wedding vendors began dismantling what should have been a celebration, I stood in the gardens of Hawthorne Estate, the venue that had started this whole chain of events, and wondered what would happen next. The days following Amber's disastrous wedding were chaotic. Marcus remained in federal custody, denied bail due to being considered a flight risk. The FBI investigation revealed his fraud was even more extensive than initially thought. Nearly $50 million from over 100 investors, including my parents, who had committed $200,000 of their retirement savings. Amber was released after questioning without immediate charges, though Agent Cortez informed me that the investigation into her potential involvement was ongoing. She moved back into our parents' home, her dream of the luxury penthouse shattered when the FBI froze all of Marcus's assets. The media coverage was immediate and brutal. Boston socialite's wedding crashed by FBI read one headline. Financial fraudster arrested at altar, proclaimed another. Some articles mentioned the venue dispute between sisters, painting Amber as both victim and villain in a tangled family drama. I kept my distance from my family during this time, unable to face the continued accusations and blame. My parents had left several voicemails, each more accusatory than the last, suggesting I had orchestrated the timing of Marcus's arrest specifically to humiliate Amber. They seemed incapable of acknowledging that their beloved daughter had stolen my venue, attempted to sabotage my relationship, and possibly participated in fraud. 2 weeks after the wedding debacle, Ryan and I were having dinner at home when my phone rang with a call from Agent Cortez. I thought you should know, she said after brief pleasantries. We've uncovered emails between your sister and Marcus that clearly demonstrate she was aware of the fraudulent nature of his business. My heart sank despite everything. What kind of emails? Discussions about which potential investors to target, strategies for using her family connections, and explicit acknowledgement that the returns they were promising couldn't be legitimately achieved. Agent Cortez paused before adding, There's also evidence she was actively involved in recruiting several of your parents' friends into the scheme. I closed my eyes, absorbing this confirmation of my worst suspicions. Will she be charged? The U.S. Attorney is reviewing the evidence now. I wanted to give you a heads up because there are also several messages specifically discussing the venue situation. What do they say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Your sister wrote to Marcus that taking your venue was, quote, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, getting the perfect wedding location while teaching Jessica that I always win, end quote. She also mentioned that the $25,000 deposit would come from funds that were supposed to be returned to early investors. The calculated cruelty of it hit me hard. Amber hadn't just taken my venue on impulse. She had deliberately set out to hurt me while using fraudulently obtained money to do it. After ending the call with Agent Cortez, I shared the information with Ryan. "I'm not surprised," he said gently. "From everything you've told me about your relationship with Amber, she's always been calculating when it comes to taking what's yours." The next day, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother Ruth, my father's mother, who lived in a retirement community in Florida. We'd always been close, though I hadn't spoken to her since before Amber's wedding. "Jessica," she said when I answered, her voice warm but serious, "I've been hearing troubling things from your parents. I think it's time you and I had a conversation about your family." She suggested meeting at a small cafe near her apartment, as she happened to be visiting Boston for a medical consultation. The following afternoon, I found her waiting at a corner table, looking elegant as always in her simple blue dress and pearl earrings. "Thank you for coming," she said, embracing me tightly before we sat down. "I want you to know that I don't share your parents' view of recent events." Relief washed over me. "You don't think I deliberately set out to ruin Amber's wedding?" Grandmother Ruth shook her head. "I think you did what any ethical person would do when confronted with evidence of fraud. The timing was unfortunate, but necessary." After ordering tea, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "There's something you should know about your parents and their relationship with Amber," she began. "Something that might help explain, though not excuse, the way they've always favored her." I leaned forward, curious despite myself. "Before Amber was born, your mother had a very difficult pregnancy," Grandmother Ruth explained. "She was advised to terminate for her own safety, but she refused. There were complications during delivery and afterward. The doctors told your parents she wouldn't be able to have more children." This was news to me, but they had me. Grandmother Ruth nodded. 3 years later, against all medical expectations, your mother became pregnant with you. But instead of seeing you as the miracle you were, I'm afraid they viewed your arrival as a threat." "A threat? To what?" "To the special bond they'd formed with Amber. They'd spent 3 years pouring all their love and attention into her, believing she would be their only child. When you came along, they worried that loving you equally would somehow diminish what they had with her." She sighed heavily. "I tried to talk sense into them, but they developed this irrational fear that Amber would feel replaced or forgotten if they didn't constantly reassure her of her special status." I sat back, stunned by this revelation. "So, every time they favored her over me, it wasn't because they loved you less," Grandmother Ruth said quickly. "It was this misguided attempt to compensate for a perceived loss of exclusivity that Amber never actually experienced. Over time, it became a habit they couldn't break, and Amber learned to exploit it." Tears welled in my eyes as I processed this information. Decades of feeling second best suddenly cast in a new light. Not less painful, but at least somewhat comprehensible. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because this situation with Marcus and the wedding has brought everything to a breaking point," she replied. "Your parents are facing financial ruin because of their blind spot where Amber is concerned, and they're still trying to protect her rather than acknowledge her role in what happened." I wiped away a tear. "They're blaming me instead." "Yes, and that stops now." Grandmother Ruth's voice took on a determined edge. "I've already spoken to them about this pattern and how destructive it's been for both of their daughters. Your father didn't take it well, but I think your mother is beginning to see the truth." The next day, I decided it was time to confront my parents directly. I drove to their house, knowing Amber would likely be there, but feeling ready to face her as well. When I arrived, my mother answered the door, looking tired and older than I remembered. "Jessica," she said with obvious surprise. "We weren't expecting you." "I know. Can I come in?" She hesitated before stepping aside. In the living room, my father sat reading the newspaper while Amber was curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up as I entered. "What are you doing here?" Amber asked coldly. "I came to talk to all of you," I replied, remaining standing as they stared at me. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what's happened and why. My father folded his newspaper deliberately. If you've come to apologize for what you did to your sister, we're listening. I haven't come to apologize, I said firmly. I've come to clarify a few things. First, I didn't choose the timing of Marcus's arrest. The FBI did. Second, I reported my concerns about his business practices because I was worried about you losing your retirement savings, which, as it turns out, was a valid concern. You could have talked to us privately, my mother interjected. Would you have believed me over Amber? I challenged. You never have before. An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Amber's scoff. Classic Jessica. Always playing the victim, she said dismissively. You're just jealous that I was getting married first, at a better venue, to a more successful man. A man who's currently in federal custody for stealing millions of dollars, I pointed out. And let's be clear, the FBI has emails showing you knew exactly what Marcus was doing. You weren't an innocent bystander, Amber. Her face paled. They're taking things out of context. Like you took my email authorization codes out of context to steal my venue deposit? I countered. Or like you took Ryan's lunch meetings out of context to try and convince Mom I was having relationship problems. My mother looked between us, confusion evident on her face. Amber, what is she talking about? Nothing, Amber said quickly. Jessica's just trying to shift blame. I turned to face my parents directly. I spoke with Grandmother Ruth yesterday. She told me about Mom's difficult pregnancy with Amber and how you both overcompensated with her after I was born. My father stood abruptly. Ruth had no right to discuss that with you. She had every right, I insisted. I deserve to know why my parents consistently chose my sister over me, why they enabled her worst behaviors, why they're still defending her even when she's implicated in fraud. We don't know that she's implicated, my mother said weakly. The FBI has the emails, Mom, I said, softening my tone slightly. Emails where Amber specifically talks about stealing my venue to hurt me, using investor money for the deposit, and helping Marcus target your friends for a scheme. My father looked at Amber. Is this true? For a moment, Amber seemed ready to deny everything. Then, perhaps realizing the futility of further lies, her expression hardened. Marcus had a good business going until Jessica ruined everything, she said defiantly. And yes, I took her venue because I deserved it more. I've always had to compete with perfect Jessica the lawyer, Jessica the responsible one. The one time I had something better, a more impressive fiancé, a more lavish wedding, she couldn't stand it and destroyed it all. The raw honesty of her jealousy was stunning. My mother sank into a chair, looking devastated. We did this, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We created this competition between you. My father still seemed resistant to accept responsibility. That doesn't excuse getting involved in fraud, Amber. You were happy enough with the returns Marcus was promising, Amber shot back. You never questioned where that money was coming from either. The conversation continued for hours, painful truths emerging as decades of family dynamics were dissected. By the time I left, no neat resolution had been reached, but at least the reality of our dysfunctional family system had been acknowledged. In the car, I called Ryan to update him. How do you feel? He asked after I recounted the confrontation. I considered the question carefully. Lighter, I think. Not happy, exactly, but like something that needed to happen finally did. Are you going to maintain contact with them? I don't know yet, I admitted. I think I need some distance to figure out what kind of relationship is actually healthy for me to have with my family. A week later, Agent Cortez called again to inform me that the U.S. attorney had decided to charge Amber as a co-conspirator in Marcus's fraud scheme. She was arrested quietly at my parents' home, sparing her the public spectacle that had occurred at her wedding. The news brought me no joy, only a sense of grim inevitability. The sister who had taken so much from me throughout our lives had finally taken too much from others, and now justice was taking its course. 6 months after Amber's disastrous wedding, my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The most unexpected development came in the form of a certified letter from the Department of Justice, a check for $25,000, the exact amount of my venue deposit, returned from the assets seized in Marcus's fraud case. The accompanying letter explained that as a direct victim of funds misappropriated by the defendants, I was entitled to restitution. Ryan and I decided to use the money for our rescheduled wedding, though our vision had evolved considerably from our original plans. Instead of the grand historic mansion, we chose a serene beachfront property on Cape Cod, smaller, more intimate, and in many ways more meaningful than what we had initially envisioned. My career had taken a surprising turn as well. When the partners at my firm learned of my role in uncovering Marcus's fraud scheme, they were impressed by my investigative skills and ethical handling of a case that could have presented significant conflicts of interest. I was assigned to a new team specializing in financial fraud cases, with a promotion and salary increase that reflected my unique experience. Amber's legal troubles had progressed along a predictable path. After initially pleading not guilty, she eventually accepted a plea deal when confronted with the overwhelming evidence against her. She was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, substantially less than Marcus's 12-year sentence, but still a shocking fall for someone who had always seemed to float above consequences. My parents faced their own reckoning. Though they managed to recover a portion of their investment through the asset seizure process, their financial situation was significantly compromised. More profound was the emotional toll as they confronted their role in enabling Amber's behavior throughout her life. After initially blaming me for everything, they gradually began to acknowledge the patterns that Grandmother Ruth had identified. 2 months before my wedding, my mother called and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed with some trepidation, unsure what to expect. When I arrived at the cafe, she looked older and humbler than I remembered. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said after we ordered. "Your father is too, though he wouldn't want me telling you that." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family, about how we treated you compared to Amber." She looked down at her coffee cup. "We were wrong, Jessica. So terribly wrong for so many years." Tears welled in my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. After a lifetime of waiting for this acknowledgement, hearing it felt almost surreal. "What made you realize that?" I asked when I could trust my voice. "Partly Amber's legal troubles, seeing the evidence of her behavior laid out so clearly. Partly your grandmother's persistent conversations about our parenting. But mostly," she paused, meeting my eyes directly. "Mostly, it was watching how you've handled all of this with such integrity. You could have been vindictive, could have abandoned us completely, but you've remained dignified throughout." We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, beginning the slow, difficult process of rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. The wounds were too deep for such a simple resolution, but it was a start. My father took longer to come around, his pride making it difficult for him to admit such fundamental mistakes. But a month before the wedding, he called and asked if I would be willing to let him walk me down the aisle. "I don't deserve the honor," he said gruffly, "but I'd like the chance to do one fatherly thing properly." I agreed, setting clear boundaries about his role and behavior on the day. Our relationship remained tentative, but the effort meant something. The week before my wedding, I received a letter from Amber, sent from the Federal Correctional Facility, where she was serving her sentence. I let it sit unopened on my kitchen counter for 3 days, uncertain whether reading her words would help or harm my emotional state so close to my wedding day. When I finally opened it, I found 5 handwritten pages of what appeared to be genuine reflection. There were no explicit apologies. Amber wasn't capable of that level of accountability yet. But there was an acknowledgement of the competition she had always felt with me, and a recognition that her actions had ultimately harmed herself most of all. "I thought winning meant taking what you had," she wrote near the end. "I never built anything of my own, just tried to take shortcuts to what I thought would make me happy. Now I have nothing, and somehow you still have everything that matters." I didn't respond immediately, deciding to wait until after the wedding. Her words deserved consideration, but I needed to focus on my future rather than our painful past. My wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect October Saturday on the Cape. The ceremony would be held on a deck overlooking the Atlantic, with just 60 guests, true friends and family members who had supported us through everything. As I dressed in my simple but elegant gown, there was a knock at the door of my preparation room. My grandmother Ruth entered, looking radiant in a silver dress that complemented her white hair. "I have something for you," she said, opening a small velvet box to reveal a pair of sapphire earrings. These were my mother's and her mother's before that. "I always intended them for you." As she helped me put them on, she added quietly, "You know, in our family's history, there have been other difficult sisters, other periods of estrangement and reconciliation. Families are messy, Jessica. The strong ones find ways to heal without denying the truth of what happened." Her words stayed with me as I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, saw Ryan waiting for me with tears in his eyes, and spoke vows that felt all the more meaningful for the journey we had traveled to reach this moment. During the reception, I looked around at the guests celebrating with us. My parents sitting somewhat awkwardly but present, my grandmother dancing joyfully with Ryan's grandfather, colleagues who had supported my career, and friends who had stood by me through the entire ordeal with Amber and Marcus. The absence of my sister was noticeable, but not devastating. We had each chosen our paths, and now we were living with the consequences of those choices. That evening, as Ryan and I danced under strings of lights on the beach, he asked, "Are you going to respond to Amber's letter?" I considered the question carefully. Yes, but not with expectations. I think there's value in acknowledging her reflection, but I don't expect a miraculous transformation or perfect sisterhood. He nodded. That seems wise. Cautious compassion. Exactly, I agreed. I can leave the door slightly open without standing vulnerably in the doorway. 3 days after returning from our honeymoon, I wrote a brief, honest response to Amber. I didn't minimize the harm she had caused, but I acknowledged her apparent desire to understand her own motivations better. I included a photo from the wedding, not to flaunt my happiness, but to share it, a small gesture toward whatever relationship might be possible in the future. As I sealed the envelope, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. What began with the theft of a wedding venue had cascaded into revelations about my family, my sister's criminal activities, and ultimately, my own strength and values. I had lost a venue but gained clarity, lost certain illusions about my family but gained honest relationships, lost a sister in some ways but perhaps, someday, might gain a more authentic connection with her. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected packages. Sometimes the thing you think you want, like a perfect wedding at a historic mansion, turns out to be less valuable than what you actually need: truth, integrity, and the courage to stand up for both. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or had to make difficult choices between loyalty and doing what's right, I hope my story gives you some comfort. Life rarely offers perfect resolutions, but it does provide opportunities for growth and new beginnings. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Has karma ever worked in your favor after a family betrayal? Did you find that justice sometimes comes in unexpected ways? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of family dynamics, personal growth, and the sometimes messy path to justice. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that even after the darkest family storms, there can be beautiful new beginnings. Sometimes the life you rebuild after betrayal becomes stronger and more authentic than what you had before.